Hi, good morning. This is not the world's best microphone this morning, so I quickly apologize for that. But I will have to essentially use it because we're just having a slight microphone problem here. But that said, let me go forward and do the question. So every week at, how do I say this? Every week during, we like to answer questions around the food sense. So the question that's come in this week is really around answering questions around how to write an SOP for chili powders. So I just want to emphasize that obviously every month we do a live demo. People can attend these live demos, and in there, we actually quite often test things like chili powder. Now I appreciate then that people actually have our essentially our technology, and they go on to start doing their own work. Now when they're doing their own work, then we're able to support them through formats like this, where we are now doing a weekly Q and A session for FoodSense. And so I will obviously say that in those demos we definitely do test things like the hotness of chili powders. It's probably worth saying that it's not too long until we have the next FoodSense demonstration. This will be on the 26th of September 2023. Hopefully you can find, in fact I'll put the link underneath the video after essentially we've finished, so that you can actually find the next demo. If you've got any questions on ZP, please don't forget to contact us. I will get now to the point of today's webinar, which is really writing an SOP for the analysis of chili powder. But I'm going to take quite a technical approach to this because obviously FoodSense now, I think we've been working on this for 5 years, so you gain a lot of experience over the years. Just to say that the method that everyone kind of maybe compares against or is used to is HPLC. They're not first-hand used to it, because HPLC is something that's often done in an analytical lab or done by a third-party analytical facility. Now it's probably worth saying that at ZP we do own an HPLC, and we have done our own validation against HPLC to make sure that what the HPLC methods give us in terms of concentrations of capsaicin is also what we get from the ZP instrument. It's also worth saying, and this is on our website as well, and I'll put the link underneath the video, that this has been independently validated as well. Of course, the HPLC, there's a capital expenditure on that equipment, and there's an operational expenditure on that equipment. It's not cheap to own or run an HPLC, and it's not a golden standard. In sometimes people like to talk about golden standards, but HPLC is not that golden standard. What I mean by that is, if you take a chili powder and you analyze it in one lab, and the people who that we deal with, especially in the bigger companies, they definitely know this, that you take a sample, you send it to a lab, you'll get a result. You send it to a different lab, you'll get a result. Send it to a different lab, you get a result. And those three results are essentially different. So the interlab precision between or the interlab result is not the same between labs. I mean, it's also the same that if you take the same sample, send it to a lab, let's say 1 month, you'll get a result. If you send the same sample to the lab a different month, and definitely with a different ID on it, and then you send the same sample to the same lab on a different month with a different ID again, you will get 3 different results. It's statistically impossible for them to give you the same result. Now, what's very interesting actually is when you get these results from the labs, there's never a error kind of given with the result. The capsaicin is 50,000 plus or minus something. They just give you an absolute result, and every analytical technique essentially has a error associated with it. Now, if you follow the AOC method for HPLC, you can kind of see why this is not such a great system. I mean, the HPLC itself is expensive. It has expensive columns. It's using acetonitrile and water, for example. I mean, these are, especially acetonitrile is an organic solvent. It's quite toxic. When they do the sample preparation for HPLC, you see that they sort of grind or homogenize the sample, and they say if necessary. They do an extraction on it in some sort of organic solvent, and they have to calibrate the HPLC on a regular occurrence. And that's kind of interesting to see, because how regularly are these HPLCs being, let's say, calibrated? I'm not sure that they are actually. Then there's the analysis itself. Then there's this sort of data analysis, actually looking at what's called the chromatogram that comes from the HPLC system. And then there's the kind of quality control, actually making sure that just making sure that we're still running properly. Then there's the quality control, making sure that the instrument is, as they say, precise and accurate. Then there's the reporting, which is fine, and they have to give you a report and obviously documentation. So HPLC is not such a beautiful, easy to do, low cost test. So that's the sort of competition. Now FoodSense, obviously it's not obvious here because I haven't put a video in, but actually there are videos embedded, but I haven't really emphasized it, that FoodSense is obviously much smaller, much easier to run. Now, when thinking about an SOP, a standard operating procedure, you really got to think about an SOP. Is often a company will receive a piece of equipment. It could even be an HPLC, for example. It could be a FoodSense. So obviously I've worked in and run a lot of businesses. We'll get a new piece of equipment and we'll decide how we're going to use that piece of equipment in our workflow, and we will write an SOP for it. An SOP is often, I can't think of a time where it is exclusively an internal document. And so your SOP should really reflect what you want to get out of this machine. Do you want accuracy, and therefore cost and time is not an issue? So for example, you can run HPLC in a more economical fashion if you cut down some of the kind of extraction and sample preparation steps, but you've got to ask yourself, what do you want? Accuracy, and therefore cost and time is not an issue. Do you want speed? At ZP we work on a lot of rapid diagnostic tests, so therefore speed is actually the most important thing for us. So the whole sort of thing, let's say when you look at food sensors, actually it's speed. So you want speed, and cost and time are not so important. Or do you want to be somewhat accurate and you do care about time and cost? So it's a kind of, an SOP really reflects on what you actually want to achieve out of that instrument. Now there's some important facts about chili powder. Obviously with the chili powder there's capsaicin in there. Now if you're trying to extract that capsaicin, especially when you're trying to extract it into safe materials, and by that I mean water-based materials with not necessarily solvents in them, then you have what's called a sort of concentration or solubility curve, I should say. And actually capsaicin, its solubility means that realistically you may only be able to extract something like 480 Scoville heat units, but that's okay because we use a dilution to help us. What we do is we do a lot of dilution and then we back calculate the original concentration. But I just want to say to you that chili powders, they're not terribly soluble in aqueous solutions, but we've know that fact and we've overcome it by this dilution that we suggest to you. If we look at the dissolution profile, you're going to find that the concentration as something dissolves into that solution, it has this kind of curve where it kind of rises and then plateaus, and it plateaus where it's actually saturated. There's a parameter here, there's time. So if you're, let's say, analyzing chili powders, essentially the more time you leave them to extract, then the more likely you are to have reached this plateau. If you don't reach the plateau, let's say you were extracting a sample for 5 minutes versus 5 hours, you could well get a difference in result because of the extraction time is different. Now we haven't done that kind of formal study at ZP. It's something that we're well capable of, but we haven't done it. So dissolution time can be important, because if you wanted to kind of always have a repeatable result, you either have to control on time, or you always have to kind of control on time so that you actually have extracted all of the material. So when you hit that kind of plateau of concentration, then you have given it enough time. What affects the time it takes to get to that sample? Now, I'm just thinking about dissolution in general. How quickly when you want to dissolve something. Temperature is useful, but I'm honestly going to say don't play with temperature when doing capsaicin extraction. The reason being is the FoodSense is intended to be a rapid, easy to use test. Once you start heating things up, it doesn't feel like it's particularly easy. It doesn't feel particularly rapid, and you start adding kind of a cost, at least in terms of time. Now, the next one here, surface area of the powder. This is important, I think, and this is one that you can control. And I'll talk about that one in particular today. Dissolution is also, the powder itself. So it's the molecule that we're trying to get out of here is capsaicin, but each powder has, will have these are materials that are essentially grown. There's different materials in these powders, and these materials will have different abilities to hold on to the capsaicin and stop it essentially dissolving into the solution. So the powder is a variable. And there's also agitation rate. But because we're suggesting vortexing, I do feel like it agitates, shakes it really quite well. Now, also the rate of dissolution is highest when the solutions are diluted. As we reach the kind of saturation, the dissolution rate actually goes down. So I don't suggest playing with temperature. I do like the idea of playing with surface area. The powder you can't do anything about. The powder is a powder. It's the matrix in which it comes. The agitation rate you can control quite well with just a vortex, and I'm sure people and you already are. And then the last one is, we do use a lot of, let's say, buffer in order to ensure that our dissolution rate is quite high, because as you come towards saturation, the dissolution rate goes down. So that's why we use dilution down here. So these kind of 1 in 100 dilutions, are a sort of a good idea. Just to say on powder diameter, it's something that you probably can control. If I've got a coarse powder, it's dissolving, essentially things dissolve from the surface outwards. If I obviously grind that powder up slightly, I increase the surface area. Whoops-a-daisy, and I went a bit too quick, but you can see where I'm going with this. But if I grind the powder a little bit more, I actually increase the surface area quite considerably. So it's not something, at ZP, we want to give people fast, quantifiable results, but we do understand that different powders can have different kind of coarseness or different granular sizes in them. If you really want to get a control on that, then and I would just want to sort of, I suppose, show you the impact of this, that rate of dissolution and therefore time for extraction is proportional to the area of those, or sorry, the surface area of those powders. So the surface area, as you increase it, the area can increase by, for example, in this case, by going from this sort of single powder granule to essentially splitting it into 4. I've increased the surface area by approximately 3 times. And that would mean if my extraction was originally 6 minutes, then I could have actually brought it down to 2 minutes. So I think there's a lot to be gained by playing with grinding as opposed to playing with temperature, agitation. These are not things that I would be super keen to play with. So temperature, I'm not super keen on it. The powder itself is, to be fair, there's nothing you can do about it. So, the capsaicin is in the powder. Whether it then, I want to say, leaves the powder and goes into the solution can be strongly influenced by the powder itself. But there's nothing you can do about this. That's why the SOP is almost like a personal thing, because for different powders you may have to increase the extraction time because the powder is particularly good at retaining the capsaicin. Agitation and vortexing, obviously we do use vortexes. Vortexes have sort of motor speeds or frequencies on like 750 to 3000 hertz. I mean, that's what we use, and I think there's enough agitation in there. Grinding is something that we don't talk about so much on the videos because we're always of the mind that, look, we're going to try and make this test quick and easy to use, but if you really want to get to, let's say, reproducibility, then maybe grinding is something that is fairly easy to actually implement. And then the other parameter is time. Now, in some of the videos when Solrun is talking about time, she'll with a chili powder, she'll say, "Oh, I'm just going to do it for 30 seconds." But she'll also sometimes say, you'll hear her say, sometimes, if people are really looking for a kind of accuracy, I'll tell them to leave it overnight. I don't like the overnight situation because obviously, we want, the FoodSense is fast and quick and easy to use. So what, I feel like this, that I would rather be working on a 3-minute assay and writing an SOP for a 3-minute assay, and it's easy just to leave things longer to extract, but I would actually put more effort into speed than compensating for or trying to improve accuracy by extending the length of extraction. But you will hear Solrun say, some clients, they have different needs, and that was the whole thing about the SOP. What is your requirement? I'm a guy who's always I don't want to say in a rush, but I like to get things done quite quickly. Therefore, speed is quite important to me. For some QA labs, especially when their throughput's a bit slower, or a bit lower, that actually doing an extraction overnight is okay for them, but it's not something I'm particularly sort of keen on. But you can kind of write an SOP, and maybe I'll talk through an SOP in a little bit. So I'm just going to silence that for a second. But in these kind of demonstrations, you'll actually see that we actually vortex for 30 seconds. So I think we are doing it. Let's say 30 seconds is a bit quick, especially because we don't grind it. So you may get an incomplete capsaicin concentration. For me, it's okay, because if I have a powder and I do it for 30 seconds, as long as I'm consistent with that 30 seconds, then I will get a repeatable result. So I suppose for me, sometimes it's actually more about repeatability than necessarily always, there's something called accuracy and precision. So I'm kind of more interested in precision than necessarily accuracy. And the reason I sort of bring that up a little bit is because when I look at the competition like HPLC, I generally don't think it's as accurate as people say. When you're doing a manufacturing process, you want it to be a repeatable process. Therefore, you want the test to be precise. Whether you're absolutely accurate is not actually as important as I think as you want, because you want the process to be repeatable. That's precision. Whether your capsaicin is measuring at like 45,000 Scoville heat units or 50,000, that's accuracy. And now that's probably more useful on a product that's going out the door to the consumer, where you want to kind of get the heatness level. But when you want a controlled process in a manufacturing, then I think precision is actually more important. And this is why I find the question about SOP actually quite interesting, because it's quite nuanced. It's almost like a sort of a business decision that you don't get everything for free in life. That you have to balance, the requirements of the business, with the sort of scientific rigor, if I can put it that way. Let's run. So with an SOP, if you want, let's say, accuracy and precision, you probably want to bring that solution to a kind of where you've dissolved all the capsaicin, and that probably means time. But I want to talk about how to accelerate that time. So I absolutely know that the people who are asking this question are probably already doing this, but it's take the chili powder, mortar and pestle it. I mean, this feels to me like something that you can do. You can do in a fairly fast manner. Grind it up, so you now have a powder with a much smaller sort of grain size. Extract that. I still like these kind of extractions of something like 0.1 grams dissolved in 10 milliliters of buffer. Vortex that. Now this vortexing is another parameter now. We do it for like 30 seconds, but you will hear Solrun say, I leave it, I get people to sometimes leave it overnight. I don't like that, but that is one way of dealing with, make sure that you've actually extracted everything. So I put 12 hours here because when people say, I extracted for 12 hours, what they mean is they left it overnight. I think the most accurate part and precise part of all this is actually the test itself. It's the sample preparation. I think the people who are running this test know this. It's the sample preparation. So an SOP is a document that is obviously written by the company itself. It tries to achieve the company's goals. And it's very hard to kind of, from the outside know what the company's goals are. But I think it's something that, like a ZP, we're pretty good actually at science, and understanding. Really balancing, I would say, what's this company trying to achieve? What's the equipment capable of? And essentially coming up with an SOP that connects these two things. But that's really, for us, that's a kind of a consulting service, or we also have labs as well. We're actually able to sort of do that kind of work and that kind of test. So you can also outsource it to ZP, and we would probably treat it like either a micro project or a mini project. But we are quite capable of doing that at ZP as well. So I just want to say thank you. Now, let me back up a little bit and say sorry about the microphone at the beginning of this today. I had to quickly change microphones. You can see I'm traveling, but as you can see, as part of our kind of support of these products, if you've got questions, reach out to us. If you're in India, reach out to TechNando. The questions come through to us, and then we put quite a lot of effort into coming up with these presentations. Okay, so if you have any questions, as I say, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thanks very much.